Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. And you guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. I'm going to try to make it through this video while sweating profusely, speaking of eating meat, because when I do these videos, I turn my air conditioner off for better sound quality. And I just ate a pound of steak, and those meat sweats are starting to kick in. And I live in Houston, and it is insanely hot in the summertime. So I'm going to try to make it through. But I had just covered the other day, and these are going to come out a couple days apart. These are actually being filmed the same day. But I just covered Vegetable Police's video of him talking about the carnivore diet and his blood work, and I found it a little bit bizarre. And I filmed a reply and I've rendered it and everything. And as I was looking through stuff, I came across a video by Frankie, the Italian stallion, Tufano. And I don't really wander into this section of YouTube very often. And he had his own perspective on it. So I thought, you know what, I would watch what Frankie had to say and then kind of chime in and thought we would get into it. So let me put on my +5 out of Speechcraft and let's talk about it. Because Frankie had his own perspective. And I'll be the first to admit I don't really follow Frankie. Because I don't always wander into the more extreme diet end of YouTube and kind of what I call hippie fitness. But again, he doesn't seem to do a lot of strength training from what I can tell, so I don't really care for it. But as far as discussing things like keto diets, meat diets, paleo diets, I at least find that's interesting and I think it's noteworthy. So, I mean, eventually I will probably look a little further into what Frankie's doing. Right, I'll look a little further. I haven't seen that much of his content, to be fair, but I do know that he and Vegan Gains have had some back and forth. And I mean, I know that Richard is ridiculously crazy. I know that Richard has his own set of ridiculous health problems and can't train and has all these issues that he doesn't want to blame and admit it's his vegan diet that's a problem, causing other inflammation in his knee due to his bad squatting form, all this other stuff. But, they've had some back and forth. And so there might be something to what Frankie's doing. And that doesn't mean automatically, though, that what he's doing is right. But I at least think, based upon what I've seen, he's probably more intelligent than Richard. So I'll check out what he's saying further later. But I watched this video, and he discussed some points regarding Vegetable Police, which I wasn't aware of, actually. The fact that he has certain medical issues, and that really explains a lot of what we're seeing in the blood work. I was unaware of that because I took that video by itself without looking at the rest of his channel. So the first thing that he did address was the creatinine levels. And like I said, the same thing there. People who are on higher protein diets, and particularly people who train at all, medical doctors who are familiar with this, and I've named some, they don't get generally as concerned about it as people might think. Furthermore, he was inside the reference range, as he noted, and when you're in the reference range, this is not a concern. Anytime you're within the reference range on medical literature, even though we could argue that the reference ranges might not be ideal, you probably are not in danger of dying due to something being on the higher end of any reference range. I mean, we've got to be realistic here. Got to be realistic. The other big one, though, is the C-reactive protein. And I found that puzzling. And again, Frankie caught something that I didn't. I missed in the information. He had said, look, yes, his C-reactive protein was unusually high, which is surprising on this sort of diet. But he also said it had been higher when he was a vegan. So it was insanely high still, but it was even higher when he was a vegan. Well, that's pretty telling. That's interesting. And the reason that tells us something is that what is it that we know about C-reactive protein on keto diets? This is not my opinion. This is based upon like Alzheimer's research, right? Because these diets have been used for decades. For decades by neurologists. I'm talking going back 80 years. We have scientific studies going back 80 years on epilepsy and ketogenic diets for their therapeutic effects. What is it they note in all the research on like this more recent Alzheimer's stuff? Everybody's C-reactive protein goes down and their blood serum levels of saturated fat go down on diets that are comprised of like 50% saturated fat or 40% saturated fat intake. Their blood serum levels of saturated fats go down. That's consistently noted, and that overall body inflammation reduces. In fact, if you guys remember when Dom got there with Dr. Lane Norton, PhD, and they discussed this stuff on Joe Rogan, they both had talked about that, and the concern that some people had was that it doesn't lower inflammation so much. Do ketogenic diets lower inflammation so much that it could interfere with training effect? And they agreed that it shouldn't, that it doesn't, that it shouldn't be enough to interfere with training, because that's actually a big concern. So when you hear people who are in the bro science world will talk about, hey, we've got to bring our cortisol court block or take things to bring cortisol levels down immediately after you train because they're worried about inflammation, you actually interfere with the growth process. You interfere with the training response to training. That's not a good thing. In fact, we know that supplementing significant amounts of things like vitamin C immediately after training, whether it's endurance training or strength training, seems to blunt the training response. You get less benefit from the actual workout at the muscular level, right? Because you reduce inflammation too much. So that's actually been a concern historically, but it doesn't seem to be a large enough response to interfere with training. So it's not there. But that's a question a lot of people have asked, a lot of coaches and athletes have asked. All right, these diets lower inflammation. That's one of the reasons I utilize the ketogenic diet as a master strength athlete, because it's not just me. I know other lifters. I know athletes who are better than I am in my age bracket who do this because they can train with higher training volumes and things like their tendons and their overall inflammation stays lower. They can train harder and recover from it better. Now, that might seem counterintuitive because a lot of people say, what about the insulin response, lower insulin? Well, it doesn't seem to be offset enough, especially if you get enough protein in. And athletes can stay in ketosis on much, much larger amounts of protein than the general population, that it seems to be lower. And that it's fine. You can train harder and therefore get a little more training volume in and recover better, and that will more than offset that. But even like your IGF-1 production and things at the muscle tissue level aren't going to be compromised if protein is high enough. So this is noted. This is noted by athletes, by coaches, by various people. A lot of us benefit in that regard. That lower inflammation is a positive thing. And he's worried about, again, his inflammation. Well, it's gone down. His inflammation has gone down. And then what Frankie had revealed is that you're dealing with someone who has a history of like ulcerative colitis. All right. That makes sense because when you're dealing with that sort of gastrointestinal distress and big gastrointestinal damage, these are people who are going to have enormous inflammation responses in their body. And it is going to be a nightmare getting that under control. And let's go back to the point. This is one of the problems with veganism. A lot of former vegans, a lot of vegans now, they'll refuse to admit this. They'll put their fingers in their ears and they will not admit how many vegans out there who did long-term vegan diets now have GI tract issues as a result of it. How many of them suffer various inflammation problems as a result of it. It's pretty high. It's an ongoing issue and it needs to be addressed. Vegan diets are not healthy in the long term. Okay, and I don't care what the WHO says. We can argue about the problems with the World Health Organization later. But this is noted anecdotally. Tons of vegans report these problems. This is one reason a lot of vegans leave veganism in spite of the cravings and other stuff and the fact that, you know, they dream about meat and they crave meat all the time and they can't deal with that. Things like gastrointestinal distress and general inflammation are one of the problems with a long-term vegan diet. And this is exactly what you're seeing. You have someone like this who has now had a history of colitis. Well, these all plant-based diets are going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem if you've had a history of colitis, and you're going to suffer from possible lifelong inflammation problems, so you get it completely under control, and you may not ever. But Frankie had pointed out it was dramatically lower following this style of diet, which means it improved it. So even though his C-reactive protein was atrociously high, like dangerous high, it was lower. It is still reduced from the even higherly dangerously high level that it had been as a vegan. This is a good trend. This is a positive sign. So this is a good thing. And the other stuff he talked about was stuff like, again, vitamin D3 deficiency. But, you know, what we find is that a lot of people need to supplement vitamin D3. I supplement it by default. It's one of the very few supplements I take, and I do that no matter what diet I'm following, right? I do that no matter what diet I'm following. Particularly when I was living in colder places, like I was in the UK for a few years before coming back to Texas, I learned it's just beneficial to just take it. It's inexpensive, it's cheap, it's not a problem. But some of these issues you have is someone like him, if he's got a colitis issue, well, that he has absorption issues. He has malabsorption issues in his gut. So he's going to be more deficient easily in certain things like B12. He's going to be more deficient in a lot of these things. He's got to get that inflammation under control in his villi of his gut so that he can even absorb nutrients properly. He's going to have to get that under control. It's not necessarily this diet now that's causing it. It's those things. And then the most important thing, he was worried about his total lipid profile But again, as I said in my video, and then Frankie pointed out also, his triglycerides went down dramatically. His triglycerides cut in half. And of all your concerns in your lipid profile, the triglycerides are actually your biggest concern. Like elevated triglycerides are the largest concern in terms of heart attack and stroke risk. Not saying other stuff doesn't matter, because it does. I'm not downplaying that. But we know that triglycerides are the worst. That is your biggest concern. And universally, triglycerides go down on any form of lower carbohydrate diet as a general rule. In fact, any diet where you just start cutting sugars out, and you start cutting even fructose intake down, triglycerides go down automatically. But things like keto diets, your triglycerides can drop to nearly zero. And that's a good thing. That's your blood fat. That, people talk about, oh, they make the joke about blood fat or having arteries that are full of butter. This triglycerides is your concern. His triglycerides went down. They were higher when he was a vegan. Probably because he might have been a fruitarian, right? When you're eating 2,000 calories of fruit every day, and I'm not saying fruit in moderation is bad, because it's not. In fact, diets that are high in fruit and an overall balanced diet actually are pretty good. Fruit has a lot of health benefits in the right context. Now, I don't necessarily eat it because I do a keto diet, but that's its own story. It's not that fruit is by default bad, but excessive amounts of it can be. Excessive amounts can elevate triglycerides in a particularly unbalanced diet, and a vegan diet is usually an unbalanced diet. So I thought they were interesting points by Frankie, and I just thought I would cover those and point that out, and I'll link his video down below for you guys. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.